We're going to do lesson 5.2 today, which is on standard form. And with a quadratic, an equation that has an x squared, that's all we're talking about this unit, there are different ways that you can write the equations, very different ways that they can look. The first one we're talking about is standard form. So standard form either starts with y equals, it might start with f of x equals, and then it's ax squared plus bx plus c. A, b, and c will be some number. Now it's important that you always associate the a with the x squared. It's not necessarily the first number, but it's always the number with the x squared. If you don't see a number, you assume that it is 1. B is always paired with the x, and c is always the number by itself. There are two things that you can tell just by looking at the equation. The first one comes from the number in the front, or a, the number with the x squared. If that is negative, then that means the parabola is concave down. It means it looks like this. If your a value is a positive number, then it's going to be concave up. It's going to look like this. Now, the other thing you can tell just by looking is the c value. This gives you the y-intercept. Now, if you write it as an ordered pair, anytime you have a y-intercept, your x value is 0. You put the number in the y spot. The big thing that we're going to talk about today is something you can't tell just by looking, and that's the vertex. There's an equation that you have to do to find the x value. So that formula, we start out x equals, and it's a fraction. Now in your fraction, you're always going to have a negative out front, and then in parentheses, you are going to put your b value. So it's negative b. Remember, that's the number up here that's with the x. And then on the bottom, there's a 2. There's always going to be a 2 on the outside. Always. There's always going to be this negative in the front, on the top. And then on the bottom, you put your a in parentheses. So it's negative b over 2a. That gives you just the x value of your vertex. You have to plug that x value in to find the y value. Well, let's do an example. I kind of wrote out some steps for you here. You won't generally have this, okay? But in this example, we have f of x equals 2x squared plus 12x plus 16. It's important that you are able to recognize what's a, b, and c. So a is the number in front of x squared, just the number. B is the number in front of the x. C is the number by itself. And then we're going to do the formula. To find the x value of the vertex, we do negative, and then in parentheses is our b. So we take our b and we put it here. And then it's 2 times our a. So the a goes there. And you can type this in the calculator. I'm not going to pull up Desmos, but you'll do Desmos. But in the TIs, if we hit alpha y equals, hit enter, negative, and then in parentheses is 12, 2, and then my a is 2. And that gives us negative 3. So that means the x value of the vertex is negative 3. To find the y value, we take this and we plug it back in the original equation where there's an x. See how down here I put some parentheses in place of the x, we're going to plug in a -3 there. So if I type this in, it's important that you type it in exactly the way it's written. 2 parentheses -3 squared. Notice that squared is on the outside. You only put in your x value where there's an x. Any numbers before or after it go outside the parentheses. Plus 12 parentheses -3 plus 16. And that gives us -2. So our vertex is the point -3, -2. Remember, the vertex is the point that's either at the bottom or at the top. If I go back and think about this one, this a value is a positive number. So earlier, I told you if the a value is positive, it opens up. So right here would be your vertex, and that would be the point -3, -2. So there's some more examples that we're going to do together. On these, I've asked a few more questions than I did on the front, but the big thing is that we know how to find the vertex. So that formula, I'm going to go ahead and fill in negative, and I'm going to leave parentheses where I'm going to fill in. But the negative is always there. The 2 is always there. Now, if you go back to the formula, it's -b. So if you look here, b is the number with the x, just the number, and that number is 16. And then 2a. A is on the bottom. A is the number with the x squared. But if you don't see a number, don't put x here, don't put x squared. We assume that number is a 1. And it would be a positive 1 unless there was a negative. And so in your calculator, -16 over 2 times 1 is -8. And then the y value, we're going to plug in -8 where there's an x. Now it's really important that you only replace the x with the -8. And that's going to go in parentheses. So that -8 is coming in parentheses. That squared has to go outside of them. The only thing that's in parentheses is your -8. Plus 16. Then there's an x. So -8 plus 71. If you don't put this -8 in parentheses, you will not get the correct answer. And we get 7. So that means the vertex is at -8, 7. All right, axis of symmetry. So very first lesson, we talked about axis of symmetry. That is the line that goes right down the middle of the parabola. And I told you when we did that lesson, you absolutely have to always put x equals first. And then the number that goes here is the x value of your vertex, which in this case happens to be -8. Now I'm going to skip down and look at this one, concavity. So if the parabola opens up, we call it concave up. If it opens down, we call it concave down. So this one, if you look at your a value, my a value is 1. Okay, so that up here there's not a negative in front of my equation, it's positive. So that means it looks like that. We would say concave up, and it's okay to abbreviate. Now, because it's concave up, where is your vertex? It's at the bottom. So we would say it has a minimum, and that minimum is at 7. It's the y value of the vertex. So the axis of symmetry comes from the x value. The max or min is your y value. And then the y-intercept, I told you at the beginning of this, it is your C value. So it's this number up here, 71. You can just put 71. You can put 0, 71. You could even put y equals 71. All right, I want you to pause this. See if you can at least get through finding the vertex on number 2. Okay, so when I found my vertex, this time my b value was a -2. So when you did your formula, you still have the negative on outside. You always have that. And your b is also negative. You don't have to worry about the fact that those negatives cancel because your calculator does that for you. Just make sure you always put the negative outside, and then your b is also negative. And then over 2, a was +1 again. So that equals 1. And then to find the y value of the vertex, I went back to my equation, and I replaced each x with this 1 in parentheses. And that got -6. From there, our axis of symmetry is x equals the x value of the vertex, which is 1. This parabola, like the other one, is concave up because a is positive. So it would have a minimum at y equals -6. And the y-intercept is your C value, which is -5. All right, and then number 3, I'm going to do this one kind of with you. I'm really going to get the vertex with you because it can be tricky. So x equals negative, and then in parentheses is my b, which is -14, 2, and then my a. Notice how there's a negative in the front, so it's going to be -1. And if we type this in the calculator, whoops, we get -7. Now here's where it can be tricky. When you go back to plug in, the only thing that you replace is this x. I'm going to circle that color in that x. The negative, this negative here, stays out. The squared stays out. So it's going to look like this, negative, and then I'm going to plug in my x squared. I'll come back and plug it in. -14. Then there's another x, -59. Okay. And my x value was -7. Now, you can't be trying to do some mental math and say, hey, I know 2 negatives make a positive, because you're messing up the order of operations. Don't do that. Just type it in your calculator. I will show you how you can do this on Desmos. But for now, you just got to know to be careful. Don't try to do too much in your head. Now finish out these questions here, and then you can check and we'll be done. Okay, if you filled in your vertex, we had -7, -10, which meant the axis of symmetry is x equals -7. This time our a value was negative, which meant it was concave down. So the vertex is at the top, meaning we have a max at -10, and the y-intercept is -59.